under the RIA, all conflicts of interest need to be disclosed, right? So that means that in the documents, typically in the private placement memorandum or PPM, the project will need to describe and disclose all of the potential conflicts of interest, what parties are involved, what roles they have, and we'll get into more details on that. But generally, what you want to do is avoid unnecessary conflicts of interest. And what do we mean by that? Well, conflicts of interest are allowed under the new laws as long as they're disclosed, but that doesn't mean that you should accept them, right? And so that means that a project where the same group of people that controls the developer, the borrower, the regional center, the lender, the same group that controls everything, that is a great example of a major conflict of interest where there's a significantly higher investment risk if something goes wrong. And so, put simply, don't pick a project where the same group of people control both the lender, the company managing the EB-5 money, and the company that's borrowing the funds. That's a recipe for future disaster. So identify the conflict of interest. It's got to be disclosed. It can't be hidden under the current laws. So look at that, and then, if that's the case, then avoid and try to find something where you've got independence. Ahmed, do you want to talk to us a little bit about independence and also on the attorney side as well, in addition to just the kind of project operation side?
Yeah, absolutely. Here you're looking at kind of a general chart that you might see for in terms of how a regional center project is structured, right? So there's two key entities here to always pay attention to, and especially in terms of who owns those entities and who controls and manages and has power within them, right? And that's the new commercial enterprise, which we've got listed here as the NCE, and then the JCE, or the job creating enterprise, right? So in nearly every project that you're going to see, you're as an EB-5 investor, you'll be investing into the NCE, which is a partnership in most cases, right? You, along with the other investors, go into this partnership, and then that partnership then makes a loan or an equity investment into the project company, which is the JCE. Now, typically, who's controlling the NCE and that money going into the project company? It's usually going to be a general partner, and that's typically the regional center themselves, right? So you've got a regional center who's kind of on your behalf making the investment either through a loan or an equity investment into the project company. And so they're also responsible for that investment, right? Something goes wrong, they're able to, on behalf of the partnership, kind of recoup that capital or take the necessary steps to recoup that capital, right? Now, here you see the developer is typically who's controlling the JCE, right? And that makes sense. When the partnership makes the loan or the equity investment into the project company, that's the developer now taking control of the capital and deploying it into the project and ultimately doing what the business plan says that it's going to do. Where you can run into some issues, right? And again, you should always look at this under the lens of what happens when something goes wrong, right? When everything goes right, it doesn't really matter how this is structured. When everything goes right, you're going to get your money back. Everything's going to go well. But what happens when something goes wrong, right? Ultimately, if the developer, if the developer is also the general partner, basically one entity, are they going to sue themselves to then recoup capital on behalf of the investors in the partnership? Hard to imagine that that would be the case, right? So what we've seen in the past, and we hear a lot about vertically integrated developer regional centers saying, hey, this is the best way to do it, because if something goes wrong, well, they're already a developer. They've got the experience to kind of come in and basically fix the project, quote unquote, right? But the reality is that if the developer is already in a project that isn't doing so hot, what's to say that they're going to act now on the investor's best interests to then return that capital, right? They've got a project on their hands that isn't doing so well, and instead of being able to return the money, they're certainly not going to reach into their own pockets to do that. They're going to try to fix the project, but ultimately that may be at the cost of the investor, right? That may be in their best interest, but maybe not in the investor's best interest. So I think that this is a common fallacy that's peddled around within the industry of, hey, vertical integration is the only way that a project can be kind of fixed But in reality, I think a third party regional center who's basically on the hook as much as the investors are, right? I think what gets lost a lot is when we're a third party regional center, we're acting on the investor's behalf and we make an investment into this project company. If something bad happens, we also stop making money. So it's in our vested interest to act on the partnership's behalf and do whatever is necessary to recoup that principal and also generate as much income as we can because we need to make money as well. That's really the best way to ensure that there's no conflict of interest and you've got someone acting on your behalf or someone who's basically on your team, right? In this whole structure.
Yeah, yep. And I would say that the most important thing there that you said, Ahmed, is when things go right, the conflicts of interest are never a problem. Like 99 out of 100 times, if they're good projects, even if there's a conflict there, completely fine. It's all about, and what we focus on is if things go wrong in that downside chance, how do we protect ourselves and our investors? And that's why we think it's so important to have that independence, just because you never want money going from one pocket to another from somebody and then being in charge of both sides of it. You always want to have that arm's length relationship and have a manager in there that's representing the investors that's different, just in case things go wrong. So again, you can choose to ignore conflicts of interest. And if you have 100% confidence the project is going to be successful, sure, you can check this box and not worry about it. But we always like to be on the side of what happens when things go wrong.
Yep, exactly. And this next slide here kind of just illustrates some of those concepts in more detail where, again, if things go wrong, the developer is going to act in their best interest and they're not going to act in the best interest of the investors. Whereas if you have an independent manager controlling the general partner who's managing one group of people to worry about, which is the investors, and so there's no conflict and it's very clear, for what actions that they're going to take are going to be in the investors' best interests. One other point that I want to can you talk a little bit about hiring an attorney who's worked on the project and all the conflicts that kind of come on that, and why we really emphasize that any investor can choose any attorney that they like, and they're not going to be hiring anyone that's worked on or represented EB-5AN.
Yeah, absolutely. So, this is something that comes up often within the industry. It is small and it is niche. And yeah, at EB-5AN, I think one of the things that we emphasize is you want to avoid all unnecessary conflicts of interest, right? We just kind of talked about one of the biggest ones, but Sam just brought up another one that definitely exists. And when you're hiring an attorney, it's the same kind of concept, right? You want an attorney who's going to go to bat for you, that you want them to be on your side. They're your attorney. And you don't want an attorney who's kind of going to be, to put it bluntly, they're going to have hands in both jars, right? They're representing you. They're also representing the regional center. And now they've kind of got to choose when something goes wrong. So the best case scenario is when you go into a project, you choose an attorney who's completely independent. Sure, they may have filed for other investors in the same project. That's totally okay. But they don't have any, the regional center is not also their client directly, and creating that conflict of interest that if something goes wrong and that attorney now has to represent you in order to get money back or to basically make sure that you get your green card, like all those things. I guess more so on the immigration side because the green card, right? That's really where the immigration attorney is most relevant. Yeah, you want them to totally be looking out for you and not worried about, okay, what should I be doing for the project overall that might kind of help the regional center save face or fix the job creation issues or things like that. That's a different problem altogether. You want your attorney to just be focused on, okay, like Raj invested with me. He's my client. I'm going to do everything I can in my power to make sure that Raj gets his green card through this process, and whatever else happens out there happens. At the end of the day, I'm focused solely on Raj. I'm going to bat just for Raj. So that's really something that I think people should be aware of. And this is a really, really easy conflict to identify because any attorney has to disclose any conflict of interest in their engagement agreement. So don't just sign on the dotted line. Always be looking at the engagement agreement and looking for any waivers or disclosures of conflict of interest because, yeah, like Sam mentioned, every single aspect of this investment is so important. And this is one way that you can gain an advantage where other people may not be looking for it. You want to have everyone that you're hiring and paying good money for on your team in the event that something goes wrong. Just like Mike said, when things go right, nothing to worry about. But when something goes wrong, you want to make sure that everyone that you've hired and paid money to is going to bat solely for you.
And an easy way, again, as Ahmed mentioned, check the engagement agreement, but just simple question in writing, like, have you in the past or are you currently taking money from the regional center or the project? Just very simple. If the answer is yes, move on, find a different attorney. Answer is no, then at least you know, all right, this person's not, financially motivated and has, a major conflict, right? There's thousands of attorneys out there, and in any traditional transaction, one willing to hire an attorney that's also representing the other side. That's crazy. That is just so uncommon in any other transaction. But unfortunately in EB-5, because a lot of investors, haven't hired attorneys in the past and don't really know what to look for, this is becoming an issue. And so it's just something that, again, as Ahmed mentioned, if things go great, not an issue, but you've got as investors in any capacity, whether it's for a green card or for a profit or for whatever, you always want to be looking at, all right, if things go great, I'm sure it'll be fine. But if things don't go great, what protections have I, put in place to try and, make sure that I'm still protected?